to Deb. So.
Yes, Hima, thank you. Thank you so much. We want to thank our groups that gave the presentation on the enterprise service management adoption in the US and UK. At this point, we're going to go directly into our second session, and it is about cloud strategies. So I'd like to introduce Jody Couch from UC Berkeley, who is our moderator for the cloud strategies session, and she will introduce our next presenter. Jody?
Give me just 1 second to get that set up, Deborah. Make sure I got the right people with the right. All right, Jody, you should have the permissions that you need now.
Great, thank you so much. All right, so we are on to the second session of track 2, applying ITSM. We have Carrie Robertson leading the session today. Carrie's the Director of Infrastructure at the University of California Office of the President, leading cloud and on-premise hosting and network, database, and system administration. Carrie's led 6 unique enterprise application cloud migrations, including most recently for the human resources system that serves all 230,000 employees of the UC system, including me. So I thank Carrie for keeping my, my paychecks coming. And with that, I will turn it over to Carrie.
All right, let me get my screen. All right, does that look okay, Jody? Okay, great. Hi, everybody. So my name is Carrie Robertson. Today, I'm here to talk about different cloud strategies. So you've been given the direction, you need to go to the cloud, but how are you going to get there? So some considerations you need to take before you begin. First, let's talk about this. This is my favorite conversation because it's so many different things to different people. So some people consider software as a service the cloud. They're right. Some people consider their campus private cloud a cloud. They're also correct. For this conversation, I'm going to focus on those most common cloud providers, which are Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud Platform, and Microsoft Azure. I'm not really going to be focusing on those private cloud providers. There are some questions around the benefits to those, and it's really, really a niche kind of market. So for this conversation, I'm going to just focus on those biggest, what I'm going to call public cloud providers. So one size does not fit all. So as Jody mentioned, I've worked at 4 different campuses now. And so I thought I would talk through the most recent experiences I had at 2 different campuses. So currently I work at University of California Office for the President. That's the administering body that oversees the shared system-wide technology and services for the different 10 campuses, 5 medical centers, and 3 national labs. So at my time at University of California, Santa Cruz, we were in need of doing a hardware refresh to the data center, but we actually didn't have enough space in our data center to also support faculty and their research needs. So the decision was made to move from self-managed enterprise applications in the campus data center to be moving to self-managed in AWS for those enterprise applications. The timeline for that project was 2 years. We had 2 years to get out of the data center, or else we'd have to refresh all that hardware, which was extremely expensive. It was funded from the existing reserves, so the money we had been saving up to make that large CapEx purchase. And we did move all of those enterprise systems, which are listed below. The notable piece here is because it was pretty new, this was back in 2015, 2016, it was pretty new to our campus, so we had to go big and bold and start off with the identity and access management, because if we could do identity and access management and we could have all of campus logging in through single sign-on, through Shibboleth, using Grouper, all of these key critical services, if we could do that, then our business partners were more comfortable that we could also move their enterprise systems, such as PeopleSoft or Banner. So that was a strategy there. And then at University of California Office for the President, we were using a managed service provider at their own data center, and we're told that we had to leave in 6 months. And that was for our system, as Jody mentioned, which is handles all the payroll, about $1 billion in payroll for 230,000 employees, and people really like to get paid. And they like to be paid accurately. And so it was a pretty critical system that we had to be successful in that migration. So we actually leveraged a new managed service provider and had them help us move to AWS. And that project was successful, and we were able to fund it through the future savings that we knew we'd had when we left the existing managed service providers. So it's just an example that there are many different strategies to get to the cloud. So if you're hoping to come up out of this presentation with a single answer, I'm not going to provide that for you, but what I'm going to provide you is a lot of dimensions and considerations that you should take when coming up with a strategy that works for your campus. So defining your journey, most of the time when I talk to folks about moving to the cloud, it's associated with their desire to go from a data center to the public cloud, going from the data center to Azure, going from the data center to AWS, something like that. I wanted to highlight here that there are other options, such as I did at University of California Office for the President. We actually moved from a private cloud to the public cloud with a different managed service provider. So I bring this up just so people remember that there is an option to go to the AWS, the GCP, the Azure with help from somebody else, because maybe your team isn't ready and maybe you need a stepping stone. Maybe you need to prove that your systems can migrate to the cloud successfully, and then you work on moving that into self-managed mode. There's a lot of different options. So I want to make sure people remember that. I often walk into conversations where people assume it's self-managed 100% or bust, and that's not always the case. All right, so a couple of different migration strategies here. So you've probably heard of these by now, right? So there's the lift and shift. That's basically taking everything you have in your data center and just moving it to the cloud, right? You aren't optimizing anything. You're not taking advantage of any cloud services, such as a managed database, nothing like that. You're just moving it. The challenge with that is it can meet some of your requirements. If you need to leave your data center, then fantastic, you're going to be able to do that. But you're not going to realize many savings, if any. Sometimes it's actually more expensive to recreate exactly what you have in your data center in the cloud if you don't take advantage of those cloud native solutions. The next option that people discuss is sometimes it's replatforming. I like to think about it as more like this lift, tinker, and shift, right? So you're taking some advantage of those cloud services, but you're not restructuring the entire system. You're not trying to make every bell and whistle work perfectly in the cloud initially, because otherwise you get stuck. So that's the third option, is re-architecting. And I love this option, and I totally support this option if you have unlimited people, resources, financial resources, and unlimited time. Then this is the best solution ever, right? Because if you have the very best people and you have a huge number of them, and you can really re-architect everything and make it completely serverless and make it totally optimized, this is a great option. It's not realistic for higher ed for most people. Most people can't actually dedicate over a year to migrating one system and don't have endless resources that can just, refine the perfect solution. So I feel like re-architecting, unless you're building, simple web pages, something like that, is really not realistic if you're trying to get out of your data center. So usually people end up in the re-platforming and taking advantage of those options where they can, right? It's not perfect. They're going to get it there and they're going to keep tinkering. They're going to keep tweaking it as they need to, but they are starting off with some of those improvements, such as a managed database. All right, so the biggest mistake. So I think this is what I usually go to presentation for, is like the honest truth, right? Like I actually want to know what the problems are so that I don't replicate them. So the biggest mistakes when you're coming up with a cloud strategy, first of all, is thinking like, oh, we have time on this. We have time. We don't need to figure out our strategy yet. Nobody's actually using the cloud on our campus. Okay, that's wrong, right? Faculty are going to conferences. They're getting coupon codes. Your staff have accounts that they're playing with in their personal time. Something is happening on the cloud. If you have a Google Suite, you can even get to GCP without realizing it. That piece can be enabled for folks. So something is already happening on your campus. The cloud's been around and strong for well over a decade, and you need to prepare yourself that you're not starting off perfectly clean, but you need to acknowledge there is something there. So you cannot just pretend it's not happening. That's not going to work. Another strategy I've seen that does not work well is when somebody says, oh, let's move things to the cloud. Everybody go play, do whatever you want. It'll be fantastic. Build, 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 with no structure at all. And that only works if that's your end game. If you plan to leave it completely unstructured and more of a free-for-all forever. Otherwise, all you're going to do is take things away from people. And most people don't adapt to that well. Most people want to be adhering to standards from the beginning and know where they have flexibility, but giving them the world and then taking it away is really hard to do. So I think that is a big mistake. Multi-cloud from initiation. So this one can be debated, but I have a pretty strong opinion about it. So I want to acknowledge that others might feel this is a great solution. For me, given the limited resources that I've seen at the 4 locations that I've been at in higher ed, going multi-cloud from the beginning and saying we are going to support everything completely and fully and be super deep in all the major providers is not realistic, right? So you can definitely know that you're going to need to support all of the cloud providers, but you need to have a preferred cloud provider because that's the one you're going to go the deepest on. The only time that it makes sense to go multi-cloud from initiation is if you're going to not leverage any of those cloud native microservices that really help you to get the benefit of the cloud, right? If you're really going to be cloud agnostic on every single one of your workloads, then sure, you could start from the beginning. But pretending that you can support all 3 new platforms at the same time of those 3 big providers is not realistic. And that's where people start struggling, is trying to do too much. And their people get confused and they can't leverage those microservices that are vendor specific. Another challenge I've seen is this extensive and rigid upfront planning. So this is I'm going to spend a year preparing exactly how I'm going to move everything to the cloud, and I'm going to build it that way, and it's going to be perfect. And I have this beautiful schedule, and we're going to fit it. That doesn't work because the cloud keeps changing, right? So every week there's new services shared and available, and your requirements are going to change, and there's new instance types. Everything keeps changing. So you need to have a high level plan, but going to have super crazy specifics and locking them down is really going to be a struggle. It kind of goes against everything the cloud stands for, right? The agility that the cloud really encourages. Categorizing the work as infrastructure. This is just an infrastructure project. And as a director of infrastructure, I love infrastructure, but realistically, this is going to absolutely change the world for your finance team. It's going to change the world for your security team. It's going to impact your business owners quite a bit too when you move out of a data center and you're moving to the cloud. So pretending that those groups aren't going to be impacted by this is also a big mistake. I mentioned previously the lift and shift, moving an exact replica of the data center to the cloud is a big risk. You get not as many benefits as you would think. And often people move things exactly as is to the cloud and then sometimes have to move them back out of the cloud because they didn't move it in a smart way and the costs were out of control. And then the last one is, and unfortunately, I want to be an optimistic person, but if you base your cloud strategy on what I'm calling an aspirational state, that's my nice way of saying, oh yeah, my team's an expert on everything cloud. They know exactly what they need to do. And we fully understand all of our infrastructure and our business partners are completely on board and will have no concerns with us moving their system. That itself can also lead to a pretty big challenge related to your cloud strategy. So now you're ready to get started. So the very first thing you need to do is figure out how well is your scope defined? Is it something that everybody understands? Do they actually understand it? Is it that all enterprise systems, what's an enterprise system? You know, you really got to lock that down. We've got to make sure you really understand all of the infrastructure as is. Sometimes I'm finding that historical information has left with a contractor's departure or something. You get ready to migrate and everybody's like, ooh, I don't know what that server did. I don't know why that was there. That is not helpful. So you want to make sure that you really understand the scope, it's well defined, and everybody agrees to it. Next, why now? So this is a big one. The cloud's been around for a while. I think there's a big push for people to move to the cloud. There's all the cloud benefits. I'm not going to get into those. Everybody knows those by now. But you need to figure out why right now. Why right now is it important for you to go to the cloud? Are you retiring your data center? Admit it, right? The worst thing you can do is pretend that you're going to keep the data center and then not, because then people don't have trust with you. What's happening to your existing managed service provider if you're leaving them? Why are you leaving them? Is it service quality? Is it cost? You need to acknowledge those things. You need to be really transparent with people about why you're leaving and why you're moving to the cloud. And then another one, which is out of a personal experience, is, you know, leadership, your current leadership can be fully supportive of moving to the cloud. If you get new leadership, you really need to confirm that that new leadership is also going to support you, because if a new leadership comes in and your cloud strategy changes, then how are you going to handle that if you're halfway through a project or a migration? You're about to retire the data center and then they say, no, let's keep it. You need to really think about that and the why now. All right, the next one is the timeline. So kind of to add on to the why now, we need to figure out what the timeline is. I have been most successful in my cloud migrations when there is a hard, firm timeline. When that timeline can't be moved unless there is substantial costs, right? Of course, you can always pay and get yourself out of it, most problems, but you need to be really clear about having a firm timeline. If it's just the mindset of we want to move to the cloud because we want to move to the cloud and we'll do it in the next few years, it's going to be really hard to be successful there because people are going to be trying to get other projects in front of your project. The business is going to push back about what their timeline, what works for them. Student systems is going to say, oh, we don't want to move during enrollment, which of course makes sense. But you really have to think about your timeline well, think about what's going to happen if that timeline is missed and make it clear so people are all invested. All right, then you need to come up with your cloud strategy statement. So this essentially is, we are moving this scope of work to the cloud because of this thing on this timeline, right? So at University of California, Santa Cruz, it was, we are moving all of the enterprise systems to the cloud because there is no more room in our data center for faculty to do research. And all of this has to be out by, I don't know, I think it was like June of 2018, because our hardware is going to need to be, and it's end of life at that point. So hardware has to be retired, right? That was our statement. And we would say it to everybody. Anybody we could find was super clear as to why we had to do that. At University of California Office for the President, we are moving this giant payroll system to the cloud because our current vendor is forcing us to leave and we must be out by December 2020. There's no way around that, right? So that was a very strong statement. Everybody understood the scope. It was super clear. They understood why now. They're understanding that it can't move and that we've got a firm date that we can't control, right? I can't control that hardware is end of life. I can't control that a vendor is kicking us out. Those are things I can't control. That helps really to push along the narrative. Stakeholder engagement. So I actually put these in order that I think they're the most important. This is a little daring here. I put them in order for people to consider that this is the order I would go into when I was having these conversations. So the first one is security. If your security team is not comfortable with the cloud, you're not going to be able to do anything. You're not. You've got to win them over. Either they're on board and you can win, or you might have to win them over, but you have to get them there. Finance is the next important, not only because you need project funding, but this is going to absolutely change their world. They are going to have to think about OpEx, and that is not something everybody's familiar with. Project funding, ongoing funding, recharge, all of that. Then they're the normal groups, right? IT leadership, your business partners, making sure they're on board. I feel like if those four are all aligned, then you can usually bubble that up to the executive leadership and get sign off because it's infrastructure primarily. So they're usually like, okay, if it makes everybody happy. Looking to see where you can leverage faculty and students. Do you have a strong computer science group that you could be leveraging to help with your project, to help with your migrations, to help with your ongoing? Can you leverage those folks to become staff? And then human resources, because jobs will need to change at some point, those job descriptions. So next, the next section here is around financials. So this is the one I think people forget, in my opinion, the most. So, you need to think about how you're going to fund the cloud long-term. It's very different from a data center where you buy equipment, it sits there 5 years, and then you retire it, right? This is a very different world. The biggest challenge that I've seen over and over again is knowing the true cost of any service or application, right? Can you tell me exactly what your student system costs? Exactly. Are you going to include electricity? Are you including the real estate? Are you including the people? Are you including the people beyond just the developers that support the system? Are you including the network people who need to help? Are you including the service management people who also need to participate? These are all things that you really need to understand, because the number one question you're going to get asked when you move to the cloud is, well, did you save any money? And your answer, you have to have a comparison point, and you don't have that usually in higher ed to start with. They just know, well, the application, the licensing costs this much, but there's so much more. So you need to really be thinking about the financial impact at your campus level, at your division level. Another consideration is how important is the optimization. Can you wait to do cost optimization till after you're there? If you can, that's going to save you a bunch of money, right? And a bunch of time. If you can, not money, I'm sorry, it won't save you money. It will cost you money, but it will save you a lot of time. And the idea there is that if you can get your workloads moved to the cloud, perhaps they're slightly oversized, and then you sort of tighten, the sizing as you're using it, then that's going to allow some comfort for people rather than making it really lean from the beginning. That might cause some concerns around people from their risk perspective. Next, the financial for the project. So at one university, we were able to leverage our future savings to fund the project, which was a great way to do it. We did have some surprises around our licensing bubble. There were also some kind of licensing opportunities that needed to be cleaned up. Maybe we weren't quite where we needed to be with some of our licensing, and that was uncovered as part of this project. So that's something to think about. Can your staff actually absorb all of this work? Do you have a group of people that have this capacity? Are you going to need to backfill them? Do you give them stipends? Do you need contractors? Do you have the non-utilities. So obviously there's the, Azure, GCP, AWS utility bill that comes every month, but have you thought about, how you're going to actually fund the other pieces like a PM or something like that? Do you have that in your current staff or not? Can the existing workloads be decommissioned as they're cut over? Or if your only way you realize savings is by shutting down your entire data center, then you really need to think about that when you're talking about the timing and the overall strategy. And another consideration that some people forget to leverage is that some of these cloud providers are willing to help you, right? So they want you to leave your data center. They want you to move to the cloud. So talk to them and see if you tell them about your project and work with them, sometimes they have ways to help you, and that's definitely to your advantage. Next, the financial ongoing. Okay, so you're going to try to use a calculator. You're going to anticipate what your utility charges are. They're going to be off because you aren't going to actually know how you're going to build it and how it's going to operate until it's there. Are you going to shut it down at night? Are you going to have to size up on certain times of the year? You aren't really going to know the true cost. So you need to be careful with committing to a specific number. But another challenge I've seen is, not thinking enough about the recharge, right? So recharge can be done in several different ways. Are you going to recharge other entities around your campus? Is everything going to be centrally funded? You really need to sort through how that's going to work. Recharge is something that if you need to do recharge down to the exact penny, you need to set up a completely different account structure and tagging strategy before you even start. It's totally different than if you're going to be centrally funding all of these systems or whatever the workloads are. So it's something you definitely need to be thinking about. Another consideration is what services are going to be offered centrally. So let's say that you are going to have, a central payer account and there's going to be recharge. Do you need to kind of charge people for doing the recharge services? I don't know, maybe. Are they going to come to you asking for help and need architectural design help from you? How are you going to pay for that? Or are they just get to leverage your IT experts as part of the central funding? That's great, but you need to think about that. Even the integrations between each other, there's, data ingress and egress. You've got to be thinking about all that. How is that going to be recharged and shared? So it's really a different world that you need to spend some time thinking about. And then one of the other challenges I had was I came to my financial person. I was like, we're going CapEx to OpEx. And she was like, okay, like a little nervous. And then she got on board. And then like 6 months after we went live, I'm like, and now I need some money for a big capital expenditure. And she looked at me like I was crazy. And this is because I was thinking, well, I'm moving to a monthly invoice. But then there are advantages like in AWS, there's something called savings plans and reserved instances. And if you buy those things up front, you basically are saving money. It's kind of like pay up front and you save some money throughout the next year. But that's a big CapEx cost, right? You can easily spend $100,000 or more on these reserved instances and things like that. So you say you're going from CapEx to OpEx, but sometimes there's still some CapEx. You got to make sure to prepare for that and warn your financial folks. It's really important to get them on board early.
And Carrie, we are right about out of time. I'm so sorry. This is great content, but yeah. So if you want to do your wrap up, that'd be great.
Sure. Okay. Sure. No problem. All right. So in summary, you need to make sure to conduct an honest assessment of your current state. You need to broadcast your cloud mission statement far and wide. You need to make sure to engage those auxiliary groups like financial and security. Remember, technology is going to be the easiest part. Definitely fully commit and make sure to celebrate visibly so that others want to participate in your effort.
Thank you so much, Carrie. That was a great primer. I know your slides are going to be available for the little bit that we missed at the end, and that will be a great tool for people to use to figure out their cloud their cloud strategy, and then also communicate. So thank you all, and I will hand it over to our next guest.